Cinco, Siete. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast of Colonial Student Ministries.
Woo!
I'm Luke Johnson with Molly
Pitkin.
and we're here to answer your questions and talk about this awesome, deep conversation lesson / lecture that we got from John Krager on human trafficking.
Yeah. We got to hear some of John's journey with this topic of human trafficking, and he is currently in the law field. But many of the questions that we were getting were some following up for John and his experience, but also others that affect us in the places that we are, when we spend most of our time in schools and neighborhoods and doing different sports events. So, Luke, what is a question that you would like to start out with?
I'm looking at them currently right now, so some of your guys' responses, and I just wanted to give a quick, not a disclaimer, but a side note. Just talked to John about some of these things, and after everything you might have heard or anything that we are saying, John really, really does want to push the idea that if you do want to learn more and talk to him or get involved, please reach out to us so we can reach out to him, or if you know John personally, reach out to John, go to like Revocup, get coffee, whatever, go to lunch and learn more and kind of find other ways that you can start getting engaged, because some of the questions have to do with that. So first question I have for Molly would be, what are some jobs here that help kids and people being trafficked? And we just talked to John a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And I might have just answered it with that, like, first get in touch with someone who's actively doing work, because he kind of mentioned that it's not as easy as just going and serving the poor. I guess not even if that's easy, but a lot of the jobs are harder to find. It's more with, especially, or not hard to find, but harder to get involved in at present age. So
yeah, harder in the sense of like not the most obvious, and not necessarily, I mean, even when he was giving statistics over the weekend of, how many people are trafficked and what types of trafficking, because there's many different types between labor and sex trafficking and all sorts of different things, that all of those are estimates, because you can't just walk up to someone and be like, hey, are you being trafficked, and check, okay, I'm counting you as part of the tally. And so even here with jobs, there are multiple organizations that John was mentioning, but they're not as obvious as they may seem.
he said, you can start thinking about law enforcement. I know there actually are a few of you I'm in the group that are thinking about law enforcement, but that's a great way to get involved in justice or civil justice. It all starts there first, kind of knowing your terms. But then even like, the route John took, it's a longer route. It can be hard and difficult, but it's just as impactful, like being an attorney and working with social workers and working with judges and getting to, like, building relationships. And that's what John's been doing really well, is building relationships with just various people in the civil system. And that helps you just kind of get more involved and called upon, and you learn information about what's going on. So you're able to investigate and work with charities and nonprofits as they continue to work against this cause. Another question I have for you, Molly.
Wow. So many.
Yes. How do you go about buying electronics that aren't made by slaves? Because on the website, there was only one company.
Oh, yes, the website. John mentioned one website, and I am at a loss at the moment for what it is. But essentially, it was one where you can look up and see what is fair trade. And
it was a .gov.
It was a .gov?
Yeah. It's on if you guys go and watch the video, it's on there. You'll be able to see it. It got on the videotape. So,
yes, and so there's a bunch of things listed, and we have a very observant eye, because I didn't even notice that there was only one thing listed there for electronics. So
I guess let's expand on the question. How far do you take that principle?
That's a good question.
Like, I know that I saw a documentary, not even if it's slave.
Yeah.
But even it's child labor, but then there's just like basically just generic slave essential labor. Or I know that Walmart had a big case in Bangladesh when one of their factories burned down and killed like everyone inside because there weren't proper like exits or things weren't up to code in any way that we would see it.
Yeah, definitely. I spent a decent chunk of time in college, it just with some classes processing some of these things, and it can get, trying to figure out, okay, number one, I need to do my research and figure out what companies and places are using slave labor, which ones aren't. So that can take a lot of time. But then even once I got to a place where I kind of figured that out with me and some of my friends, we were just like, okay, so we, this is a list of what to do. This is what the list of what not to do. And it got to a point where it can be, I almost liken it to like, when you're trying to live your faith all just through like the works of what you're doing, and it can get, I am at a loss for words right now. But more legalistic. That is the word that I am looking for. It can get really legalistic. And so it's hard. I've realized it's hard to have this balance between being thoughtful and doing the research, but not letting it necessarily control you. Because although we can be mindful and maybe step away from buying certain things that we normally would, it's, there's systemic problems here. And so just by not buying something, we're not going to change the whole system and the whole thing, but we do have a role to play in it. So I think that this process, as far as like where to buy and who to buy from, is something that we really need to bathe in prayer. I know that there are certain things that are most, famous or popular or known for being using abused labor. I mean, stuff like coffee is a big one because it is so high in demand. And then also chocolate is another big one. And so looking into those things.
Rice.
And then also, rice was on the list that John showed us. And then also roses, which is something that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. And so usually when it comes to those sorts of things, I try to say, okay, like there are multiple different types of chocolate I can be buying.
Right.
What is the best, what is the one that honors, people and gives dignity. So all that to say, I don't want to sound like, oh, don't pay attention to it because it's the system problem and we can't really change it. But then on the other hand, I don't want to make it so everyone feels paralyzed and it's like, okay, I'm trying my hardest and I'm checking and I'm doing all the right organizations, but it still is really hard and legalistic. So there's that balance of being able to do research, not letting the research control you, but being able to know that our little bit makes a difference, but also being able to hold the tension of like, we will not be able to see the end of human trafficking, at least on this side of things. We will definitely, Jesus will definitely conquer it in the end. And so there is hope for that. But we live in this time of like, okay, we see the need for it to end and we have the hope for it to end, but we don't get to see the full desire, but we do get to continue to work to that end because we value people and we value giving dignity to people and empowering people. And so, yeah.
Great. Another person wrote, what is the exact definition of human trafficking? And there seems to be a few, and John sent us one, but I'm looking at one now, and it says it is a noun, and it's the action or practice of illegally transporting people from one country or area to another, typically for the purposes of forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation. So, and there's a lot of, even when you just go online and you like the DHS.gov, so I think that's kind of what John used was from the Department of Homeland Security, puts out a lot of different stats on human trafficking. Because I think a lot of us, when we hear about this and it's just ridiculous that we think it happens, and like what happens going on like during sporting events and the Super Bowl and stuff that happens, like even John mentioned in Kansas City alone. So that actually kind of segues into another question you had, which was, is it possible that anyone I know is being trafficked?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's definitely possible.
It is definitely possible, yeah. And I mean, I just think of on a larger scale too, of like, we pass by so many different people each day at school, driving places, and it is amazing to think about, like, wow, what is going on in all these different people's lives that I'm walking by and I have no idea. Both good things and hard things. And so it is definitely possible that someone that you have seen today has been trafficked or is being trafficked.
And I can even read, which is simply because we're actually talking about this on the DHS.gov. So from the Homeland Security Department, it says human trafficking is modern day slavery and involves the use of force, fraud, coercion, or some kind of ways of labor to get a commercial sexual act. Every year, millions of men, women, and children are trafficked in countries around the world, including the United States. It is estimated that human trafficking generates many billions of dollars, which John said, profit per year, second only to drug trafficking. So it's a very profitable form of crime. Human trafficking is a hidden crime, as victims rarely come forward to seek help because of language barriers, which John mentioned on the phone earlier, that sometimes people that we don't recognize who might, seem to be a little bit, I want to say in trauma, or we just can tell there's something wrong, but it might be speaking a different language. It could be a chance that, I don't want to totally put that label on someone, but it is something that the DHS says to look out for. Fear of traffickers or fear of law enforcement. So actually there's times that they're just afraid of the law, even though what's happening to them is against the law. So traffickers use force, fraud, coercion to lure their victims and force them into labor or commercial sexual exploitation. They look for people who are susceptible to a variety of reasons, including physiological, emotional vulnerability, economic hardship, lack of social safety net, natural disasters, and political instability. The trauma caused by traffickers can be so great that many help not identify themselves as victims or ask for help. Many myths and misconceptions exist. Recognizing key indicators of human trafficking is the first step in any identifying victims that can help save a life. Not all indicators listed are present in every human trafficking situation. In the presence or absence of any of the indicators is not necessarily proof of human trafficking. So they ask for the victim never to attempt or confront a suspect of trafficker or someone who's been trafficked, but directly alert your suspicions to law enforcement. And they will.
And that was on which website?
That's DHS.gov.
Okay.
There's actually a number there to report suspected human trafficking, and then to get help from National Human Trafficking Hotline. So there's actually some numbers and places you can call or get info from if you want to investigate further. So I think it's just important for us to ask God to open our eyes. There's this great story of the lady who was on a plane. I don't know if you saw that in the news, an American airline.
Yeah, during the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that noticed a girl.
And they were trained. I read some articles about it. The flight attendants were trained because usually Super Bowls and big events like that are hubs. So many people are going in and out and in and out.
Yeah.
That they were training, like, this is what you look for. Someone who, maybe not the most cleaned up appearanced woman with a really cleaned up guy. Someone who's really more shy or reserved and holding to, keeping to themselves and all those different things. And so, yeah, it's really cool to see how, that flight attendant was given the eyes. I think some questions to ask ourselves too, these are ones that John had passed along to us, is, do you know anyone who has, someone helping in their house, in a servant sort of role, who doesn't speak English and is rarely outside? I don't know if that is something that we come across very often in our communities, but sometimes people are kept as, a maid or a servant in just a suburban home, and they don't necessarily have all the documentation, but they're forced to work really long hours, and they don't even really interact with many people outside of the house. So that could be a case, a question to ask. But then also, do you know anyone whose boyfriend is older, seems wealthy, and is slowly taking over your friend's life? Those controlling properties, and someone, it looks like, he's providing for her. It's great. It's good. But there's definitely a risk. And I don't want to say this to freak people out, but there is a risk of, like, okay, who is reaching out to your friends, in a significant other sort of a way? And is there abuse? Is there a showering with presents? Is there, a treating well, but then turning and treating her terribly? And, how does sexual intimacy play into that too? Those are all possible red flags.
Yeah, and that's just a good application for any of high school goers or even guys. Like to just be careful online with stuff. I know that as technology has increased, so have the ability to like find significant others via apps and all kinds of whatnot. Just be super careful with those, and especially as females, just be careful of older guys. You have to, I think, because that's a common good natured thought to be careful of, and especially people you don't necessarily know, or like Molly just said and Krager said, someone who comes along with seems to have a lot of money or is really over showering of gifts or just over present.
Yeah.
Or does odd things like shows up at your friend's house or your house. These are just very odd behavior.
Yeah, and with this too, like as Luke was reading from the website earlier, and even some of these more descriptions or insights or hints from John, we want to make sure that we clarify that you shouldn't jump to conclusions based on if someone's giving someone a lot of gifts, that instantly means they're in this category. No, but but if it does raise a question in you, like asking the Holy Spirit, like, okay, what is going on here? Why am I noticing this? How should I respond to this? And what do you want me to do? Because other places that traffickers will easily go in and out are motels and hotels, and that's usually something that I just naturally, I don't know what natural is the right word, but think about when I go to different places. Is just like, I wonder who is around me in these rooms, and even praying over hotels and motels, because those are places where people come and then they go, and that is definitely the pace that trafficking moves along.
And be careful, like when you guys do trips overseas, and just kind of taking these principles and heightening them, I think, a little bit. Never taking rides, and just got to be careful.
And it's about being wise. It's not about being
walk with confidence and
scared or anything, but it's just about, like that flight attendant, being prepared and knowing the information, and then being able to respond in a effective way if that situation is put in front of you. Some of the organizations that John did mention in the SML talk were love146.org, and then he showed us some of the Polaris Project and IJM, of course, and the World Justice Project. So those are some more hints of looking into human trafficking.
And there are just there's all kinds of good legal definitions. Like we talked about some of those terms like coercion and bribing, and it all comes into, like, it's not like we said, could be labor. A lot of the times, the majority of the time, it is labor, slavery that goes on.
And with that, I think it is interesting with this labor slavery, just that there's such a connection between poverty and human trafficking. And we talked about poverty way, way, way back in the beginning of our counterculture series when Kristen Trump came. If you haven't watched that video, it is definitely worth your time. But Jesus' heart towards poverty is very closely linked with his heart on this topic as well. And so John was like, I wish I had more time to reiterate that and make that link, because if we want to end trafficking, we can approach it a lot like ending poverty. Not exactly the same, but I think that because they're so closely linked, when we are interacting and building relationship with impoverished people, we're able to know them and know more of their stories, and maybe keep them from getting into situations where they could be trafficked, because we can educate them. We can show them, like, these are things that you be wary of, and these are things that you don't be wary of, and we get to learn alongside of them. So just that connection between poverty and human trafficking, I think, is a helpful one to remember, and can kind of put some more flesh on, okay, well, what do I do with human trafficking? Because I feel like poverty is something that is around us, or our eyes are more open to it. And so when we see that those are linked, we can be like, okay, I may not personally know someone who's trafficked, or be aware that I know someone who's personally being trafficked, but I do know people that are struggling, and I do know people that are caught in the cycle of poverty, and I want to step into those situations.
Absolutely. All right.
So yeah,
Great
if you have
stuff.
more questions, let us know. Comment here and share with your friends. And we will be diving into the topic of marriage this coming weekend. We will be pairing it up with what we talked about a couple weeks ago with singleness, coming back around to marriage and just the concept of marriage. And I feel like the view of marriage is changing as our culture keeps going on and on. So although we are not necessarily looking to get married in high school per se, maybe some of us are, but most of us are not. We still want to be able to allow God to impact our vision of marriage, so that when we come to that point, if we come to that point, if God brings us to that point, we will be able to know how to think about it and how to enter marriage in a way that glorifies God.
Absolutely. All righty. Thank you, Mom. And we will see you next week.
Next week.
All right. Bye-bye.